What happens when Hollywood's most respected humanitarian comes face to face with television's most ruthless interviewer? In just 32 seconds, one cruel comment would turn a promotional interview into a career-defining moment that left millions of viewers speechless and one talk show host scrambling to save his reputation. The stage was set like any other Tuesday evening at the London studios. Angelina Jolie had agreed to appear on Piers tonight to discuss her latest directorial project, a powerful documentary about refugees that had already won critical acclaim at several film festivals. She walked onto the set wearing a simple black dress, her demeanor calm and professional as always. The audience applauded warmly as she took her seat across from Morgan, who was leaning back in his chair with that familiar smirk that had made him both famous and infamous. "Angelina Jolie, welcome to the show," Morgan began, his voice dripping with the kind of false charm that made seasoned celebrities wary. "I have to say, you look absolutely radiant tonight." Jolie smiled politely, clearly wanting to steer the conversation toward her work. "Thank you, Piers. I'm really excited to talk about the documentary and the incredible people we met while filming." But Morgan had other plans. He shuffled through his notes with theatrical flair, making sure the cameras caught every movement. "Before we get to that, I think our viewers would love to know about your personal life. After all, that's what they really tune in for, isn't it?" The first warning sign flickered across Jolie's face. Her smile remained, but her eyes grew slightly cooler. "I prefer to keep the focus on my work and the causes I support. The documentary really speaks to some urgent humanitarian issues that I think your audience would find important." Morgan chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both dismissive and condescending. "Oh, come now, Angelina. Surely you didn't come on my show to give us a lecture about global politics. Our viewers want to hear about the real Angelina Jolie, the woman behind all those adoptions, all those marriages." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. Even they could sense the interview taking an unwelcome turn. Jolie's posture straightened slightly, her media training kicking in as she tried to maintain professionalism. "My children and my family are off limits, Piers. I thought we had agreed on that before I came on tonight." Morgan's grin widened, like a predator sensing weakness. "Off limits? But isn't it a bit hypocritical to use your family for photo opportunities and charity work, then claim they're private when it suits you?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Jolie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "My advocacy work is separate from my personal life. When I bring attention to humanitarian causes, it's about the people who need help, not about me or my family." "But surely you must see how it looks," Morgan pressed on, clearly enjoying himself. "All those adoptions from different countries. It's almost like you're collecting children like souvenirs from your travels." The gasp from the studio audience was audible. Several crew members exchanged shocked glances. This had crossed a line that even Morgan's most controversial interviews rarely approached. Jolie's calm facade cracked just slightly, a flash of genuine anger breaking through her diplomatic composure. "Excuse me?" Morgan, either oblivious to the gravity of his words or simply not caring, doubled down. "I'm just saying what a lot of people think. It's quite convenient, isn't it? You travel to these countries for your UN work, find a photogenic child, and suddenly you're the saint of Hollywood." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cameramen seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or stop the disaster unfolding before them. Jolie stared at Morgan for what felt like an eternity, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You just called my children souvenirs," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying more weight than if she had shouted. Morgan, perhaps finally realizing he had gone too far, tried to backtrack. "Now, that's not exactly what I meant to." "No," Jolie interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "That's exactly what you meant. You sat there, looked me in the eye, and called my children, my family, souvenirs." The host's smugness was rapidly evaporating, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. "I think perhaps we should move on to discussing your film." But Jolie was no longer the polite guest who had walked onto his stage 20 minutes earlier. "Let me tell you something about those children you just called souvenirs," Jolie began, her voice steady but with an edge that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. "Each one of them came from circumstances that would break your heart if you had the capacity to feel anything beyond your own ego." Morgan tried to interrupt, holding up his hand like a traffic cop. "Angelina, please. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," she continued, completely ignoring his attempt to regain control. "Maddox was living in an orphanage in Cambodia where children were lucky to get one meal a day. Pax was abandoned and struggling to survive on the streets of Vietnam. Zahara was fighting malnutrition and poverty in Ethiopia. The camera operators had made their choice. They kept rolling, capturing every word of what was quickly becoming the most riveting television moment of the year. Morgan's face was growing paler by the second as he realized this interview was spiraling completely beyond his control. "But surely you can understand how some people might question the motivations," he stammered, his usual confidence evaporating like morning mist. Jolie leaned forward in her chair, her eyes never leaving his face. "What I understand, Piers, is that you invited me here under false pretenses. You told my representatives this would be about my documentary work, about bringing attention to refugee crises around the world. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to tear down my family." "Now that's simply not true," Morgan protested, but his voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I'm just asking the tough questions that journalists are supposed to ask." "Journalists?" Jolie's eyebrows raised, and for the first time since the interview began, she almost smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Is that what you call yourself?" The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This was no longer an interview. It was a masterclass in how to dismantle someone's credibility in real time. "I've spent 20 years working with real journalists," Jolie continued, her voice gaining momentum. "People who risk their lives to tell important stories, who travel to war zones to document human suffering, who use their platform to give voice to the voiceless. You sit in a comfortable studio and attack people's families for entertainment." Morgan's face was now visibly flushed. He loosened his tie and glanced desperately at his producers off camera, but no help was coming. "I think you're being a bit dramatic here." "Dramatic?" Jolie's voice rose for the first time, and the word cracked through the air like a whip. "You called my children souvenirs and I'm being dramatic? I never said." Morgan started, but Jolie cut him off with a gesture. "Roll the tape back. Right now. Let your viewers hear exactly what you said about children who have already survived more trauma than most adults will ever face." Morgan looked like a man drowning in deep water. "I don't think that's necessary." "No, I think it's very necessary," Jolie insisted, "because either you stand by your words or you apologize for them. But you don't get to pretend you didn't say them." The silence stretched on for nearly 10 seconds, which, in television time, felt like an eternity. Morgan's producers were frantically making hand signals from behind the cameras, but none of them seemed to know what to do either. "Perhaps," Morgan finally managed, his voice much smaller than it had been at the start of the interview, "I could have phrased that differently." Jolie tilted her head, studying him like a scientist examining a particularly unpleasant specimen. "Phrased it differently? You mean you could have found a nicer way to suggest that I collect human beings like trophies?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it," Morgan snapped, some of his old arrogance flaring back to life. "Then what did you mean exactly?" Jolie asked, settling back in her chair with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. "Explain to me and to your viewers what you meant when you compared my children to souvenirs." Morgan opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish, gasping for air. No words came out. "I'll wait," Jolie said pleasantly, folding her hands in her lap. The cameras captured every second of Morgan's struggle, every bead of sweat forming on his forehead, every nervous swallow as he tried to find words that didn't exist. "You can't explain it because there is no explanation," Jolie said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "There's no way to make what you said sound reasonable or professional or even human." Morgan tried one last desperate attempt to regain his footing. "Look, I think we're both getting a bit heated here. Why don't we take a commercial break and come back to discuss your documentary?" "No," Jolie said simply, and the single word carried more authority than all of Morgan's bluster combined. "We're not taking a break. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now." She stood up from her chair, and somehow the simple act made her seem 10 feet tall. The studio lights caught her face perfectly, highlighting the quiet dignity that had made her one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. "I came here tonight to talk about people who are suffering," she continued, her voice clear and strong. "Refugees who have lost everything, children who go to bed hungry every night, families torn apart by war and poverty. I wanted to use your platform to bring attention to their stories." Morgan remained seated, looking smaller with each passing second. His famous smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "Instead," Jolie went on, "you chose to attack my family. You chose to turn pain into entertainment. You took the most sacred thing in my life, my children, and tried to make it into a punchline for your audience." "Angelina, please, if you would just sit back down," Morgan pleaded, but his voice was barely above a whisper now. "Why?" she asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. So you can insult them again? So you can find new ways to question my motives for loving them? The studio audience was completely transfixed. This was no longer about celebrity, gossip, or entertainment news. This had become something much deeper, much more meaningful. Every single one of my children knows they are wanted, Jolie said, her voice growing stronger with each word. They know they are loved unconditionally. They know they have a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect them from people exactly like you. Morgan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His producers had given up trying to signal him from the sidelines. They knew this interview was over. And you know what the saddest part is? Jolie asked, beginning to remove her microphone. You had a real opportunity tonight. You could have used this time to highlight the work being done to help vulnerable children around the world. You could have been part of something meaningful. She set the microphone down on the coffee table between them with a soft click that somehow sounded final. But instead, you chose cruelty, she said, looking directly into the camera now. Speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home, you chose to mock children who have already survived more than anyone should have to. And that says everything anyone needs to know about who you really are. Morgan finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. You can't just leave. We're in the middle of a live broadcast. Jolie turned back to him, and for just a moment, her expression softened slightly, not with forgiveness, but with something that looked almost like pity. Watch me, she said quietly. She walked off the set with the same grace she had entered with, her head held high, her dignity intact. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the studio doors, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Morgan sat alone under the bright studio lights, staring at the empty chair across from him. His face was pale, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for his water glass. The audience remained frozen in their seats, unsure whether to applaud or simply leave. We'll be right back, he finally managed to say to the camera, though his voice was hollow and defeated. But everyone watching knew the truth. There would be no coming back from this. In 32 seconds of cruel commentary about innocent children, Piers Morgan had destroyed his own credibility and handed Angelina Jolie the most powerful victory of her career. The credits would roll in silence that night, and the world would remember exactly what happened when Hollywood's most principled star met television's most ruthless host.